Hello. I find that most of you are doing quite well at gathering information about the art for our database and for the forums. What I would like to have you do now is concentrate on analyzing the art by yourself, simply by looking at it. So to practice this, I would like to discuss Caravaggio's Calling of St. Matthew. So take a look at it in your book. It's on page 649. And let's deal first with the function. It was commissioned by the Church of San Luigi dei Francesi in Rome about 1600. And so, of course, it's going to have a religious subject matter, and it's biblical in nature. It's the calling of St. Matthew to come be a disciple by Christ. So you could probably tell this from the title, and if you had any prior knowledge of Christianity. If you don't, of course, you're going to have to look up the function to see in detail what it's about. Calling of St. Matthew is a dramatic subject matter, and it relates well to what the Counter-Reformation in Italy was trying to do, namely bring people back into the church. And so this particular story is of Christ appealing to a wealthy tax collector. Two diametrically opposed ideas. Christ believed that poverty in some ways was essential to a person's goodness and their ability to get into heaven. And Matthew, of course, as a tax collector, most tax collectors in ancient Roman times took a certain amount of profits for themselves and so became quite wealthy. So the fact that Christ should call on Matthew was exceptional, and the fact that Matthew then followed Christ and became a disciple was also quite dramatic. So it's a dramatic story based on this whole notion of spirituality versus wealth and how one is more important than the other. So drama was important during the Counter-Reformation to bring people back into the church. And Caravaggio de-emphasizes certain things such as flying cherubs or angels or a frontal Christ or gold flake, things that had been around since the Byzantine period to emphasize the importance of Christ. He de-emphasizes that in favor of making his biblical scenes like a common everyday genre scene. This could be any group of men in a tavern, and Christ looks like any common person coming into the tavern. The only thing that really picks him out as being different is the slight sliver of halo above his head. So that's the function. Now the style, to look at the style, what I want you to do is take your list of terms, your terminology, and just go down through it and see how one thing after another plays out. Let's start, for example, with the composition. You can always ask yourself, where do I look first in a painting? What's the focal point, and what are the lines and shapes that draw my eyes to that most important part of the painting? So focal point and composition are what you're going to look for first. And the focal point here would be what? It would be Matthew's face. Matthew's pointing at himself, the light shining on his face. He's the center of this group of men. The innkeeper and Christ are pointing at him. The line of the light points down towards him. So that's the focal point. All of these lines and shapes are ranged around him. So it has very unified composition. The scale of the painting is fairly large. It's 10 over 10 by 11 feet, but the figures themselves are human scale, so the viewer can relate to these figures. The shapes are very naturalistic, and you have open postures with the two young men that are leaning towards Christ, more closed postures with the figures on the left-hand side, the old man leaning in and staring through his glasses in a blind sort of way at the money, emphasizing the wealth on one side, and the other man hunched over counting the money. So both open figures and closed figures come together to form this kind of dramatic group. Now the coloring and the lighting is notable because Caravaggio used a lot of chiaroscuro, which is that modeling of shadow to light that rounds figures' faces and skin and clothing. He also used tenebrism, which is the use of shadow versus light, that contrast, to make dramatic effects like the light that comes in from the closed window. And you have a window right in the middle of that beam of light, which there's no light coming in the window that we see, the light's coming into the window that's off stage, which is an interesting kind of spotlighting effect. Again, very theatrical. As far as the colors, most of them are fairly muted. You do get some reds and yellows, particularly with the group of the wealthy tax collectors, because those are colors of wealth. Most people would not have brightly colored clothes who were poor, for example. And they are paralleled by the red on Christ's sleeve. So color is used in a way that means something. Perspective, types of perspective. Again, it's one-point perspective, as you can see with the table. You have various kinds of other devices, such as overlapping. Everyone's ranged in the foreground. There isn't a great deal of depth in this painting, and that's to make it dramatic as well. It's as if they're playing out this scene on a stage. So they're kind of been pushed to the foreground. But the modeling, the cast shadows, all of this gives it a sense of realistic perspective. Viewpoint, Matthew is somewhat frontal to us, but we're getting a 3/4 viewpoint of his face, which is more naturalistic. We're seeing a profile of Christ because he is looking at Matthew, and it's that line that we follow to Matthew's face. And then, of course, we get implied motion. So you can see I've gone right down through the list of terms, and one part after another leads us to look much more closely at this painting and to see these kinds of things in depth. Christ's gesture is the same gesture as God giving life to Adam in Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel, and that means, of course, that Christ will also be giving life to Matthew if he follows him. That is really more of the function than the style. But yet that gesture also implies motion because he's pointing at Matthew, just as Matthew then takes up the gesture and points at himself. So all of the gestures and the poses imply that people could move in the next moment, which adds to the realism. So we'll stop there, and I hope you will have seen how style and function are very, very different and specific concepts in and of themselves. Style is the visual appearance of the art. Function is what it means. Bye.